Our guest today is a hospice RN, an elder mediator, and author of the book, How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. We're happy to welcome Kimberly Best to the podcast. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
Hi, this is Gabby Jimenez of the Hospice Heart. I'm excited to let you know about an upcoming series on the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm partnering with Jerry and Helen at the Heart of Hospice to bring you a special 6-part series on grief. We'll be talking with industry experts Isabel Stencil and Lisa Paul of the Death Deck about common grief issues we're all dealing with. You'll hear information about when to seek professional help for your grief and how to navigate grief that seems to hang on for years. We're also going to discuss grieving for a loved one while you're a caregiver for someone else. There'll be tips for managing grief by journaling and how to comfort someone who is grieving. Isabel and Lisa will share insight into grief issues in children and young adults. Be sure to subscribe to the Heart of Hospice podcast so you don't miss this great series. And you can also connect with me at thehospiceheart.net. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
She had me at How to Live Forever, but I want a book that says How to Live Forever and look really good while you do it.
Yeah, this is why some people say they want to die young so they make a good-looking corpse.
Oh, that's horrible, but yes,
is horrible,
exactly. Yes. So our guest today, I really like this. We connecting with all these RNs, all these nurses.
Yeah, I'm beginning to feel a little bit left out. Oh, well.
I feel bad about it.
I'm sure you do.
No. So Kimberly Best is a family mediator. She focuses on conflict coaching, family mediation, and healthcare and elder mediation. She works here in the U.S. in Tennessee. She had a long career history of working in ER, in the ICU, and trauma nursing. She also has a master's degree in conflict management, and she is trained in transformative and healthcare mediation, which she is going to define because obviously I don't know a whole lot about what those things are. They're just big words, but Kimberly's going to tell us about that.
She will. So, I'm looking at this and thinking, she's working in ICU, she's worked in ER, and she's worked in trauma. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of those are prime for conflict.
Yes.
So I think maybe there was a little bit of a transition there from seeing the conflict to realizing that she needed maybe some training in conflict mediation.
Oh boy, these people need help.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So Kimberly is passionate about resolving conflicts to avoid litigation and also to find an optimal solution to problems for everybody involved. Her book, How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. What an incredible hook. I love the title.
I do too. And really, it's about creating a legacy and leaving your story written in the way that you want it written. So this is a really great interview. You're going to love listening to Kim Best. Kim, we are so glad to have you on the Heart of Hospice podcast. Welcome to our little corner of the world today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're going to jump right in since you and I are kindred spirits and Jerry is outnumbered again today.
Once again.
So you worked in ICU as an RN, you worked trauma, you worked in ER, and then you went and you earned a degree in conflict management. Most people would say at first glance, man, that's a huge jump. But after working in nursing, we both know that conflict management is part of our job descriptions all the time. But what was the catalyst for that jump? You went from critical care to conflict management.
I went from critical care to another critical care, basically. But there was a middle point in between. So I was young. I was 19 when I started nursing. And you're right. I worked in every ICU, adult ICU that there is, and ultimately the emergency department. And I kind of got burned out. I mean, it's hard to see people go through hard things. So I also had a passion, not just for the biology of people, but the psychology of. So in my 30s, I went back to graduate school in clinical community psychology. And I wanted to know more why I tick and why other people tick. I loved psychology. And then I realized that compared to emergency nursing, which is, very fast, nursing in general, right? Like you fix things. I mean, you help people. I felt like psychology compared to that was like watching paint dry and really wouldn't work for me as a career. So I went back into nursing. And then I went through a really difficult divorce. And my brother suggested to me something called transformative mediation at Hofstra. Just the fact that we don't have to do things that we don't have to fight. We don't have to demonize people that we disagree with, that there's a better way to create win-wins and honor and respect each other, even when it's difficult. So I started my journey at Hofstra University in transformative mediation, which is just one type of mediation, and just got this brain light bulb thing that said, most of us haven't learned how to do conflict. And if we could just learn how to do this, it would change the world. Like there could be peace. And that starts at a micro level with one another in relationships, and how that expands with mediation and conflict training globally too. But so I just started leaning more into that. This is a skill that we could all learn that can change our lives. And it pretty quickly became a passion. And I went to graduate school in conflict management, like you said, and have taken off from there.
Most of the mediation that you do, is it centered around healthcare, or is it in other areas as well?
That's a great question. It's all over the place. So my heart is with healthcare. Healthcare people are my tribe. I feel good about that. The mediation itself is more of a legal field kind of thing. And being a non-attorney mediator is a little bit tough, but there's a lot of space for mediation too. So I actually do everything from family mediation, which is maybe working with couples in divorce and parenting plans and just family issues, to the healthcare, to the, I have another passion in the end of life aging part. But I also work for an organization called Mediators Beyond Borders International, and we're working on an incentive right now to help police community dialogues, to help workplace conflicts better. Just, it's kind of the same principles of conflict skills and communication that are applicable pretty much everywhere. I tend to stay in my comfort zone, so I don't do kind of big business things or things I just don't have any knowledge of. But I do practice in a pretty wide range.
So your organization is Best Conflict Solutions. The whole point is to find solutions to avoid litigation and find solutions that are a benefit, like you're saying, a win-win for everybody. When you mediate for someone who's having discussions about end-of-life issues, what kind of conflicts do you see occurring most?
So most often, and most conflicts are around the relationships, right? And when something so difficult as end of life or illness, there's almost always just years, if not decades, of conflict, of unresolved issues that is built up that comes out when things are that difficult. And family conflict's on the rise. I mean, there's one hospice group I talked to said that they estimated that 75% of their staff time was spent working in family conflict, which is just a lot.
That seems right.
I know, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it seems right. So families are further apart, right? There's more estrangement. Estrangement exists as far as families kind of quitting on each other. We have more multi-generational stuff. We have more blended family stuff. We have, I think, the medical system reports more family conflict. Hospitals report more family conflict. There's more sometimes unrealistic medical goals that create that. But I think the complexity of medical treatment as well. And then, of course, we have the social media and just the internet in general, all the information coming in at us that helps add the conflict too. And so without the skills to handle that, I've had families come to me with a dying family member and they just want some semblance of peace with that family. So to resolve the family conflict. But the rest of the things usually, so there's, hospice care, how, when, what team to use, whether or not to do it. There's conflicts around end of life decisions, around the healthcare decisions, estate planning. Lawyers will say that guardianship and conservatorship is one of their biggest things that they run across with conflict. There's funeral decisions, and there's peace with dying as well. Just conflict around dying and what that should look like. So there's plenty of conflicts in this very difficult time.
So that's interesting. Funeral planning that somebody would need. How would that look? What kind of
That's actually
conflict?
Common. So this can be before or after someone dies. A lot of times, I advocate for, just like with medicine, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So having these conversations early, there's a lot of options that weren't there before. Like there's traditional options. We know funerals used to dress in black, and now we have celebration of life. But there was here in Nashville a conference about a month ago for the Funeral Association, and they're talking about all the new ways. Which I could go into that if you wanted to have celebration of life or to keep people a remnant of that person that can last. And these kind of things challenge people's sense of what should be. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times too, if someone's not able to make the funeral plans and, brother thinks it should look like this and sister thinks it should look like this, that can cause a lot of conflict. I had one client say to me that this matters so much because that celebration of life is how that person will be remembered. And that's the place where people get peace too. I did this well. The sense I did this well, I honored this person. I did what they wanted versus you kind of carry that with you if you don't know what somebody wanted and just, did your best to put it together. So,
as a hospice nurse, I've always counseled families that are caregivers. You want to do the best job for this whole thing. It's a one-shot deal. You've got one time to get it right. And unfortunately, it's on the job training because most people don't come to it with education and instruction way in advance about how to do the death of your mother, your spouse, your sibling, so we're flying blind. We're learning as we go. And I would tell people, you want to put your head on the pillow after the death, knowing that you did a good job. This is the death legacy is what I've called it in the past. Mm-hmm. But I've never really extended that beyond to the funeral planning, which can be just as contentious because I think the grief is so heightened at that point and people are exhausted a lot of times, once they get through the caregiving experience and the death has occurred. I never really thought about it extending like that through the funeral planning.
What you just described, having to try to figure things out on the fly, right, is where I'm coming in the front end saying, listen, let's have these conversations and make these decisions and be clear, about how we want to choose that. I'm not pitching my book on purpose, but my book, How to Live Forever, Guide to Writing the Final Chapter of Your Life Story, lists all these things as the conversation that we can have. Because you're right, it is our legacy. It's not only how we'll be remembered, but in what is fractured, what's not broken or healed is what we pass on, what we leave for the next generation, right? It's so, normalizing that we're all going to die, like having conversations around that means that we can plan well. And I believe that it also means we can embrace the fact that we are alive, that we have life. And I've had people say, working through these conversations was really hard, but I feel so free now. And as a nurse, I mean, you know, and I know, and I tell stories in my book, we know what it looks like when people are trying to figure it out on the fly, how agonizing that is for them to sit in a moment and have to make a tough decision.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, one of the things that's so powerful is my own story working in intensive care unit, and a gentleman had a terminal illness, and the family just wanted everything done and everything done. They didn't want to let go of their dad, which is understandable. But from a nursing end, we could see that he was being tortured, right? And then one day, his daughter threw herself over his stomach, and she said, "Daddy, why are we doing this to you?" And I'd been in nursing so long, that was my breaking point. I mean, I started crying. My best friend was working behind me, and she saw my shoulders shaking and led me away. And I literally thought I would never stop crying, because the grief that came with watching people who haven't had these conversations, right, be put through basically torture. You know, it's torture. Yeah. And I get it's hard decisions. I mean, you're walking a fine line between hope and regret. And I use that term a lot, because in all these decisions, we're walking the fine line between hope and regret. And we have to have a realistic take on where there's hope and where there might be regret. And if we have those conversations and set, perhaps for me, I like to use quality of life. You know, how do you define quality of life? What is worth fighting more for treatment and stuff? And where are you willing to let go? And when we make those decisions and share them with our loved ones, the peace that comes with people, the stories I've heard of, well, you know what, we lost this person, but we honored what they want. I mean, that's just powerful.
Yeah, that really is. Kim, you have done end-of-life mediation. You've said you've done family mediation. Mm-hmm. You also talk about elder mediation. So describe what that is for us, and describe some of the benefits of elder mediation.
Well, I think elder mediation is around any of the issues that I just named: the conservatorship, guardianship, healthcare decisions, legal decisions, where people are going to live, capacity sometimes, you know, shows up in that. All the same kind of conflicts. The difference with the end of life is, you know, as medical people, and probably a lot of people listening know, we tend to think that end of life just happens when you're older, but it happens at any age. Right. So it's the same concepts applied, you know, at any age, to help people write their story as well as they can all the way to the end, to help families make these decisions in a safe place. So what does mediation look like for this? Well, it's a trained neutral who understands these kinds of issues, who can hold a safe space for conversations, who can help generate outside of the box options. Most of the time in conflict, we think we have two choices, right? We can either do this or this. And we have a whole continuum of choices. So in all these decisions, I look at things at a continuum. Well, this is at this end and this is at the other. What are things that we can come up with somewhere along on that? So in doing that, it can involve this kind of planning that we just talked about and I talked about before around the end of life things, so that we're honoring to as much as possible what that particular person wants. That pause was me thinking about two things that come up. And that one was, capacity. I'm a big believer, and some states have this written in their acts. We don't in Tennessee, but to the extent that someone's able to give voice in their own life, whatever that extent is, that they should be able to do that. The second part of my pause was an issue that comes up in elder mediation, which is around safety. And it comes up in hospice, it comes up in hospitals. And people think that we have to make people safe at all costs, right? And I challenge that. So we're trying to keep really safe people who are dying, right? Okay. And the truth is, when we're younger, we value autonomy over safety. We all have these needs. There's safety, autonomy, love. I mean, there's a whole list of needs. Autonomy is very important. But when people are older, we value autonomy. We wrap them in bubble wrap. We lock them in rooms, right? and they lose their quality of life because we value safety over their autonomy.
Mm.
I think COVID is a perfect example of that. So a lot of people who were in care homes of whatever kind lost their caregivers. And I took care of my dad when he was in extended living circumstances. I came in and took care of him every single day. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like to not be able to do this. This was pre-COVID, right? So I know that places, institutions do the best they can, but there's nothing like having someone who knows you and loves you there. So the weight of that choice, because for some people who are actively dying, we didn't want them to get COVID, which would kill them.
Right.
And what they lost to live a little longer was equality, was family, was connection. So our first reaction is, oh no, we have to keep people safe. I talked about this with an older group last week, and they were all in their late 80s and early 90s. And I was talking about safety versus autonomy. And one of the ladies started laughing. And I'm like, I notice you're laughing. I'm like, what's up? And she said, oh, well, Helen over here has broken both of her arms in the past whatever period of time. And I asked Helen over there, so in the autonomy versus safety, which do you prefer? And she went, oh, hell, autonomy. It's her life. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's her life. And it's true, we're keeping people alive longer, but it's also true that it's taking longer and it's harder to die as a result of that.
Yeah, this is such an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Safety over autonomy has safety over autonomy has often been our go-to. That's what we think is most important. And yet, I'm sure for the person, they're saying, no, autonomy.
I don't want to be alive if I can't live.
Exactly.
And they get to decide what feels safe to them. What activity is too risky? Absolutely.
Well, with the exception of something that could hurt others, like driving, or if someone's cooking and they may burn down the house. I mean, there are places that you have to, put that first. But the falling, somebody wanting to stay at home and they're going to risk falling. I mean, they understand that risk. I know people, my dad included, who once they've gone into any kind of assisted or extended living, just fall apart. They stop living.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So to me, it's an option to live as well as you can all the way to the end. And you get to define that.
Right. So that kind of brings us back to your book. Your book is titled How to Live Forever.
Catchy.
That's very catchy. A guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. I have to say, the title alone would intrigue me enough to read the book. So I like the title. I don't know if you or your publisher came up with the title, but I like it. So,
I had the title before I had the book, so I had to write the book. And the reason, the reason, Jerry, I chose that was because of story. I believe we're living our story. So our story is our legacy, and it lives on. So I think being purposeful and choosing how every chapter, we decide what school we want our kids to go to. We decide our careers. But at the end, we stop making decisions for ourselves, not just around dying and all the decisions I talked about, but even who we're going to be in that. And I think if we look at this, and I've used this for clients who come in and they have a terminal diagnosis. And I had one gentleman who said, he was a football player. He said, I've got this terminal diagnosis. I've lived a great life. I'm just going to sit in this chair and wait to die. And I'm like, well, that's an option, because it is. I never take away people's, options. That's an option. But, there's other things too. And one is you're modeling for your children, right? Like, they're going to die someday. And we just talked about different options he had short of that. But you're writing your story. Like, this is who you are. So who do you want to be when this is hard? We can't control, I say this in my book, I say it in my life, the circumstances of our lives. We just can't. But we can control who will be in those circumstances.
Yeah.
If I could tell a quick story, just a quick story, I have this story thing because it made my life go full circle. So as a very young nurse, I'm watching someone die. And I've learned since that not everybody wants somebody sitting at their bedside. But this person had no family there. So I sat at her bedside as she was dying. And I just literally had the picture of her two bookends just closing as she was dying. And I wondered about all the stories that people didn't know about her. You know, what her secrets, her love, her joy, her pain. And that never left me in my whole career of nursing. I'm getting a little teary now because then I go full circle into conflict, and I still recognize that we're writing our story. It's all we have. Like, it's all we have, right? And how we leave that matters to us too, and at our end, at our deathbed.
Yes.
So when we're living, writing actively our story, we can mitigate for regret. You know, we can make decisions based on what we want this story to look like. And I believe that lives forever.
I love the thought of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you had me when you talked about story, because that's one of my favorite things. When I meet with a patient for the first time, I will ask them, I said, well, tell me about your story. And they're like, it's not that important. It's not that, interesting. I'm like, oh yeah, everybody's story is interesting. So I love that you focus in on people's stories and making sure that, the final chapter of that story is written the way that you want it to be.
When you're planning your next event, keep in mind that the hosts of the Heart of Hospice podcast are available to speak at conferences and meetings. Whether you're meeting in person or virtually, we can provide education to your team on topics such as how to have compassionate conversations, how to recognize personal bias, building listening skills, and managing personal grief as a hospice professional. We'd love to encourage your team and remind them why the work they do is so important. Because we both have a personal hospice journey in addition to our years working in end-of-life care, we can also share a message of resilience and hope at your agency's next memorial service. To find out more, contact us at host@theheartofhospice.com. We'd love to be a part of your hospice journey. Now, back to today's episode.
Give us some more information that is in your book. What other pieces of advice do you have in your book that people would be interested in knowing?
See, that's a really good question. I talk about the legal decisions. I have a list there that's like 2 pages long of just how to put what paperwork you should have, including your passwords for your computer and stuff. And then I leave questions for how to write your story. There's some great tools now on the internet, and there's something called Storyworth that's really very cool. They'll mail a question that you get to create for your family. Have y'all heard Storyworth yet?
I have not. That's very interesting.
Once a week, they'll send a question. You get to pick it, or they'll choose it for you. You can involve the whole family in that. And then they'll send you a bound copy of your book at the end of that. Now, I wanted to do that for my book, but they wanted $50,000 for the website. And if you've ever written a book, you don't make money off of
Right. Right.
So, but that somebody did that is great because they'll have the written story that well as well. But I also talk about relationships and conflict. I give tools for handling conflict. The thing that people tell me has meant the most to them in my book is the remembrance that it is not how long we live that matters, but how well we live. Right. So we live in a society right now that we kind of judge everything. If somebody dies young, of course it's tragic. Right. And if somebody dies older, it's more okay. But at the end of the day, it's the quality of life. And I tell in my book the story that this is one of the most poignant things. The stories were the most poignant part to me because these are real people that I was blessed to share their stories with. And this one lady lost her son in his early 20s to a rare form of cancer. And she said, I prayed for a miracle. And then I realized he was the miracle. So I think the preciousness of now, the fact that all we have is now, and as I just believe what I learned from nursing is that every moment matters and every interaction matters.
That is so
because
good.
It's our story and it's other people's story that we're adding to as well. You know, that I want to add one more thing to that. I think empowering people to make these decisions too is what I hope people say, you know, I need to take charge of my medical care, not leave it for my family, not leave it for the healthcare system. They have a different goal than you. I love the healthcare system. I do. But they're designed to help people live longer, right? And they believe in some of the treatments. Of course, because it may work in X percent of cases, but understanding your own healthcare and making decisions based on what you're willing to accept as risk versus quality of life. So I think the empowerment piece is huge to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because when you talk about, so for instance, I'm the only healthcare professional in my family. Both sides. Nobody else works in healthcare or medicine at all. I want to make my own decisions because I don't trust those jokers. They don't necessarily know. And when you weigh benefit versus burden, that's a very personal decision. Yes. You know, when you consider options for continuing treatment, say chemotherapy and radiation, the burden of that in the patient perception is way different from the burden of that as perceived by the caregiver or as perceived by the healthcare providers. It's very different, very different. So I think if you choose not to consider those things and have those conversations, then you are handing that decision over to someone who, let's say it, is not qualified to make your decision, because who else would make a personal decision for you the same way you would? If you don't tell them, it can't be as personalized a decision.
No, that's exactly right. And here's another thing. I mean, our dying is not a failure of the healthcare system.
True.
That's right.
Our dying is not a punishment for something we did while we're alive. It's not because we ate too much bacon. We're wired to die, right?
I'm glad to know that.
It might be a little bit about too much bacon.
It depends on your genes there. But, you know, you always run across this 102-year-old who's like smoked half of his life. And
Exactly.
I mean, there are things we could do for our health. But at the end of the day, we're going to die. And when we go to the healthcare, I mean, I like to think it's changing some, that they're having the conversations around, well, this is what we can do for you, but this is the cost it'll be to you and to your family. And then not just money. Like, I didn't even mean money, but money matters too. I mean, we can't pretend that it doesn't. And this is what'll happen if you don't, because the assumption is we should treat. That's what the assumption in medicine. And we as consumers have acted like, I say that we act like we're, you know, banged up cars going to the mechanic to get fixed up and we'll drive off. But all of us are different, not just our needs, as you described so well, Helen, but our biology. So what works well for Jerry might kill you. You know what I'm saying? And It doesn't mean there's a mistake. It just means we're so different. And we as consumers need to understand that. So the question we ask, yes, how does this work for most people? And how is it likely to work and affect me as well? And then make decisions based on that, not the assumption, well, I'm supposed to have chemotherapy. I'm supposed to have radiation. I have to go through this algorithm of things because, you know, in medicine, we do work off of an algorithm a lot of times. It's your life. I mean, you are not your illness, which is a mistake we make sometimes in medicine, right? We're treating the pancreatic cancer. No, we're treating, you know, Jerry with pancreatic cancer. You are more than your illness. So you need to make your decisions around your whole life. And medicine has tried to do that, but it's a busy system with a lot of work and a lot of responsibility. And it's easy to just see the illness and forget the whole human. It is my job and your job to represent yourself as the whole human.
Absolutely.
In making these healthcare decisions. It's not easy. I think I want to say in my book, an important thing is that this is not easy.
Oh,
you know, these are challenging decisions, and having them on the front end makes them a whole lot easier when the time comes where you really have to answer these questions.
Yeah, Jerry and I have been talking recently about the term upstream, which sort of just came into my consciousness over the last few weeks. But upstream conversations before the need, before the panic, before the grief, before the exhaustion, before the event, before the treatment, upstream conversations. But there has to be personal responsibility and then responsibility on the part of the healthcare provider.
That's exactly right. The clearer we are in that, the better job we'll do on it. It's a new skill. I think you're right. We're not very good at it because we haven't practiced doing it. We haven't been having these conversations. I congratulate people who are willing to do this now. I say I call this the final frontier of taboo subjects that we don't talk about, right? And when we start talking about it, it'll get better for our kids and it'll get better for their kids. And pretty soon we'll all be sitting around going, okay, I just got this diagnosis. Instead of shame around it, instead of false hope around it, here's my options. We'll have these conversations, even maybe before the diagnosis, we'll have what do you want this to look like?
Well, and then your family can say, well, I remember we talked with you and you said you wanted to be able to do this and be in this certain place and have the ability to do that. Could you still receive treatment and still have all these things that you want?
Exactly.
So it's an informed conversation, which we have been talking about, informed patients, right? Self-determination, the rights of the patient for years. So when we do advanced care planning, and here I can feel my soapbox is coming. When we do advanced care planning based on the convenience and the efficiency of the healthcare system, that means getting your DNR, getting your medical power of attorney signed, getting a guardianship if you need one, and then having those signed and then being finished with advanced care planning, we do our patients and our industries a disservice because there is more unwarranted, unnecessary, and unsuccessful medical interventions that happen at end of life because we're not willing to take the time or we don't have the skills to have those conversations in advance.
And I want to take that even a step further and say, have those conversations in depth and with all the players.
Yes.
And Jerry, your question about what does mediation do? It is hold space for all the players so that everybody knows what the decisions are. One of the things, the topics of conflict that's very common is who gets information, right?
Oh, right.
Not just who makes the decisions, but who gets the information. And then just the people who have the legal documents in order say, oh, yeah, I have it all written down. Well, have you had that conversation with your kids so they know exactly? Because in writing, if it says check the box, I saw you look at her. There must be some relevance to that on there. Did she not have that conversation?
Procrastination.
No. She's had that very thing happen to her, and that someone put her down as the medical power of attorney and did not tell her.
Right.
And
so they didn't tell you what they wanted either, right?
No,
of course not.
No. Very awkward place to be in and very sad.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, so you're right. It requires not only writing it down, but also telling everyone, this is what I want. And so your point is well taken because that is such an important piece that sometimes gets overlooked. And I was just thinking when you were talking that, it's easy to sit down and have a conversation. I say it's easy. It happens that people sit down and have a conversation about these things, but they don't write it down. And that causes a problem because then you've got family members who hear it differently. And they say, well, no, Dad said this. Well, no, I think he said this. Well, I think he meant this. And then they need you to come in as a mediator to solve this issue, where it would have been solved if Dad had just written it down instead of just speaking it to them. It requires both the verbal as well as the written communication so that there's not any wonder or any doubt exactly what was chosen and what was meant.
Exactly. And that's the best part for mediation too. My favorite is on the front end. Always with conflict, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So having the conversation with a mediator or an elder care, mediator so your typical divorce lawyer mediator is not going to have this conversation. You have to have a mediator who does end of life stuff. But to have that and be able to say, well, what if this happens? And you guys probably know there's like 5 wishes asks some pretty deep questions a little bit, but, and there are some other organizations that kind of dig into the deep. It's not enough to say, I don't want resuscitated.
No.
Because on that continuum, this is you jumping around having a party and this is you needing resuscitated. There's a lot of places that decisions need to be made on there.
Yeah. There's dialysis, there's feeding tubes, there's blood. Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I think that comes back to how we communicate in healthcare. One of the questions I'd like to eliminate is, do you want everything done? Excuse my language, but what the living hell does that mean? Sorry, Jerry.
I'm going to tell a story, if I may, real quick. After this older gentleman in his late 80s read my book and emailed me, and he said, I just wanted to tell you a story. You asked about celebration of life. He said, and making these decisions, he said, my wife was in her 80s. She had a feeding tube. And she'd made the decisions around quality of life. And it came to a point where she realized that feeding tube was keeping her alive. And so she decided it was time for her living celebration of life. So that was her choice. She wanted to be there. How cool is that? So she called together their family. They honored her. They said all those nice things that you say after people die and they don't get to hear it. And she got to say goodbye to all of them. He said that night they discontinued the feeding tube and she died a couple days later. And he had peace. Like he gave her the ending she wanted, right? Yeah. So I'm sure they mourned her loss. I mean, this is not easy because loss is hard. There's grief. There's grief and loss come with death. But putting it off doesn't make it go away. Putting off the conversations around it won't make it go away. But leaning into it and doing it how you want to will make it a better experience.
Definitely. What a great story. That's awesome. Okay, so we want to end on a positive note, but we'd like to get personal with you if you don't mind.
We're going to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
okay.
We like to find out about our guests' self-care. So we hope that you practice good self-care. We like to call it healthy self-care because there's definitely the unhealthy variety out there.
Twinkies, Netflix binging, that sort of thing.
Things like that. So tell us about your self-care and how has the pandemic affected your self-care? The pandemic seems to affect everything else. So has the pandemic affected your self-care?
Oh, gosh, ask me another question. I want the next question.
No. That's the question at the end of the line.
That's such a good question. I have to wrestle with the self-care thing. I think us nurses do because we're givers, right? Like most nurses are givers. And I think the beauty of COVID is that it has opened up a bigger world for us in terms of things like Zoom and outreach. So my world has gotten a lot bigger, which means in some ways busier. I also think that right now, even despite COVID, things are changing so fast. Like things are just changing so fast. It's hard to keep up with the changes. And sometimes I just long for everything to stop for just a moment so I can breathe. So my self-care is always around making alone space, because while people don't believe it, I'm really an introvert at heart, and I recharge when I have alone time. I have to keep a spiritual practice. I have to keep something spiritual in my life. I think all of us are connected, and we're all so connected. We have so much in common, and when I can feel that connection, when I can, just the peace of nature, then I can recharge. We can't really give well unless we're recharged. So that's what I try to do. I also have one more trick that I learned before COVID, but it's gotten me through a lot. And I talk about all the things that happen in life that we can't control and all the problems that seem so big and they can weigh on me, just like COVID, it's like so much grief, so much loss. And there's really nothing I can do about so many things. So I started taking the things I can't control in my head, wrapping them up into a ball And I have this imaginary smoky orb that I put it in, and I hold it out to the universe. And I'm like, here are the things that are weighing on me that I can't control, and take them, because things will work out. They'll work out without me having to try to fix them. They're going to be what they are, take them from me. And I tell people, if they picture a bird flying out or a fire, anything that releases all this that they carry, for me, that is an elixir. That is a balm for me to be able to release what I'm worried about, what I'm anxious about, what I'm weighed down about, it to the universe, and say, I don't know what to do with this. What to do will come, but not when we want it to. It just comes.
That's right.
Comes when the universe wants it to.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it works. It works. I'm like, oh gosh, why didn't I learn this 30 years ago?
That's right. That's right.
So, Kimberly, tell our listeners how they can connect with you and how they can buy your book.
So the book is it's on Amazon, is probably the easiest. I do have, for book studies, I have a free PDF workbook on my website, which is Best Conflict Solutions. And then I'm Kim at bestconflictsolutions.com. So all the information is on the webpage. But most major booksellers can get the book if you want. I just find probably Amazon's the easiest.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can get them in bulk. Like sometimes I've had churches or big groups. One time I can get them in bulk at a better cost. So if somebody wants them in bulk, I'm happy to help with that too. And then honestly, I've joined in groups, the book clubs that people have, and I love that. I'll make an appearance if someone's doing a group and host one of the chapters. That's a lot of fun for me. I miss groups because of COVID, and my kids, my youngest just went off to college. I'm like, I need a new tribe. So I really enjoy doing that. Really enjoy doing that. I'm happy to do that if that's helpful to someone too.
Well, we'll have links to your website and the book on Amazon, and we'll include your email address in the show notes so our listeners can go straight to it and find you easily.
I want to take a second to thank you all for what you do. I just, it's powerful, right? And for everybody who listens, to walk someone through the end of life. I mean, there's more grace and difficulty. I mean, it's probably the hardest thing that there is to do, right? So just kudos to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. We appreciate that. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and spending this time with us. We've learned a lot from you today and certainly enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much for being a part of our conversation.
My pleasure.
So she's everything we said she was. She's funny. She's got some great stories. I love the legacy that Kim is leaving with the work that she does. She may not see it that way, but we should tell her because I think that's true. She's creating a legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. She's creating her own end of life story as well. And what a great way to work with people at the end of life is helping them to see their own end of life story and build it the way that they want it to, create that end the way that they want it to. There was a book that I read many years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the 7 habits was begin with the end in mind.
Begin with the end in mind.
Begin with the end in mind.
So start at the finish.
Exactly. And I really think that's sort of what Kim is doing here, is helping people begin with the end in mind. How do you want your story to end? And then create your story based on how you want it to end.
I'm not sure that's exactly what the author, was it Stephen Covey? I'm not sure that's exactly what he was thinking, but what a nice application of it.
I think it is. So Kim is really, I don't know, I like her spirit. I like the way that she looks at life and looks at the healthcare system as well.
Yes.
She's got a really good perspective because she's been inside the healthcare system and now working as this healthcare mediator for people, especially at the end of life.
So we would encourage you to connect with Kim, find her book, How to Live Forever, a guide to writing the final chapter of your life story. It's for sale on Amazon. You can find it there. You can connect with Kim's work at bestconflictsolutions.com.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.